And it's time for Lefties Losing It, and CNN continues to be the home of broken, tedious, afflicted souls who will spew any sort of rubbish on live television. The only exception appears to be Scott Jennings, the token conservative, the lone sane voice who happened to be there when Cameron Kasky, a typical soy boy lefty, was allowed to say this unchallenged by the host John Berman.
Appreciative that the president is being transparent about this. I would love it if he was more transparent about the human sex trafficking network that he was a part of, but you can't win them all.
Cameron's grateful that the president is being transparent about the Nobel Peace Prize and his desires for Greenland. Scott, what do you think about that?
You going to let that sit? Are we going to claim here on CNN that the president is part of a global sex trafficking ring, or?
Well,
I mean,
we're going to talk about the Epstein file. Scott, I will do the fact checking as we go along here.
Seriously, the host there, John Berman, makes hard left simpleton Abby Phillip, the usual host, look like an unbiased genius. The nerve of that CNN propagandist to say to Scott Jennings, "I'll do the fact checks, please." And the lawyers must have got in contact because that soy boy panelist was apologising profusely. He wrote, "I would like to retract my comments from CNN last night and truly apologise. Donald Trump was obviously not involved with a giant international child sex trafficking ring where women and children were systematically raped by elites. I said that by accident and didn't mean it." What? You defamed the president by accident? That's the story you're going to go with? Not sure that's going to save you in court, son. And let's not forget, you repeated that outrageous lie twice.
Repeat what you said about the global sex trafficking ring.
That Donald Trump was provably very involved with it.
Now, let's check in on some white women screaming abuse at a black man, calling him a race traitor, amongst other slurs, because he's enforcing the law as an ICE agent.
Be a race traitor?
See, again, y'all are throwing race into all of this. Nobody's throwing race into it.
You profile people for how they look. You profile people for how they look and how they speak. Without your mask on.
Perfectly sums up this madness. White liberal women screaming at a black man about racism. And here is another white leftist woman who is very proud of herself for lecturing a brown man about what he is allowed to think and who he is allowed to support. Sure, there's a word that describes that. Starts with R.
35-year-old kid in the coffee shop this morning was saying he's Republican. Young, brown, living in a blue state. I proceeded to embarrass him. He said something about a debate. I said, I do not debate with idiots. No, this is a civil war. You have not received the feedback, the consequence that your words are garbage and you're a bad person at this point. Let me communicate that to you. You're welcome.
Let's round out Lefties for the week with this performance from former Canadian Prime Minister, now full-time himbo handbag, Justin Trudeau.
Pushing disinformation the way you have.
What is disinformation?
Irresponsible.
What, that people have died?
People in Canada to vaccinate.
I'm sorry, but that's
the COVID vaccine.
But that's not misinformation. My old cameraman's mother actually.
Them and you pushed them into jail.
My old cameraman's mother actually died after complications from the COVID vaccine. So is that misinformation? Oh, now you're laughing.
He's laughing. How was that diabolically dim-witted wannabe dictator ever elected Prime Minister? Canada, what is wrong with you? You let that male himbo, lock you down and arrest your truckers, seize their bank accounts. And I've got to say, Justin Trudeau's performance in Davos did not improve when he was joined by his current girlfriend, the supremely vacuous pop star and pretend astronaut Katy Perry.
Who paid for you to come here? Was it taxpayers? What do you make of the Federal Court of Appeal upholding the ruling that your martial law was illegal? They said you violated...
It's good to see you, Ezra. It's been a long time. How you been? How you been keeping?
Pretty well, but you didn't speak to me
I'm worried about you.
I don't think you have.
You stopped speaking to me after the boxing match. I never heard from you again.
That's not true. Every time we tried to come into contact with you, you had us arrested.
Let's bring in Newsweek's senior editor-at-large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel, Josh Hammer. Josh, Justin Trudeau deserves that and so much more. His style of leadership, that performative caring together with the gross ineptitude, just sums up his time in office and sums up the World Economic Forum as well.
Yeah, you kind of have to love Ezra Levant there of Rebel News at the end to just talk about how every time they tried to have a conversation, that Trudeau moved to arrest Rebel News. I mean, that is just deliciously acerbic and pretty much directly on point because, frankly, Canadians' individual liberties, their collective common good, the country, and any way you measure the health of a citizenry or an individual citizen, it went down. It went down under Justin Trudeau. The Canadian economy went down. The Canadian standing on the world stage went down. It's really quite tragic. I mean, Justin Trudeau's predecessor, about a decade ago, Canada was led by Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper was an excellent leader there. Canada did not have to go in this direction. And earlier this year, it looked like Canada was going to shift back to the Tories, back to the Conservative Party there. Unfortunately, we end up getting this current slouch in office, Mark Carney. So a lot of self-inflicted wounds when it comes to our northerly neighbors here in America, which frankly kind of makes them the butt of a lot of jokes. That's probably why Trump was ridiculing them so much earlier on in his presidency, talking about annexing Canada and all of that there. Because Canada is, in theory, a first world country, but unfortunately, the day-to-day lives there is so utterly overrun by Islamization. It is so utterly desiccated by the roots of leftism when it comes to things like COVID vaccines there, when it comes to the transgender phenomenon, when it comes to sending in CPS, child to protective services, to snatch up teenagers whose parents don't affirm their identity there. It's frankly becoming something of an Orwellian tyrannical state there. And Trudeau, as you said, deserves all this and much more.
I've got to say, I do like this new trend in the World Economic Forum in Davos, where you've got leaders like Donald Trump and Javier Milei who go there to essentially mock the globalists and everything they stand for. Let's hear a little of what Javier Milei had to say.
That is why in this same place in 2024, I stated that the West was in danger as a result of having embraced increasing doses of socialism in its most hypocritical form, which is wokeism. In turn, in 2025, I explained the mental parasites sown by the left in humanity. However, 2026 is the year in which I bring you good news. The world has begun to awaken. The best proof of this is what is happening in the Americas with the rebirth of the ideas of liberty. Therefore, the Americas will be the beacon of light that will once again illuminate the entire West.
What do you make of that, Josh? If we are in a civilizational war, can the West prevail?
How do you not love this guy? I mean, how does someone like listen to this language and not just utterly love this guy? I'm talking about the mind virus of wokeism. It's paraphrased. It's a very close paraphrase there. I mean, he went in there guns blazing. Argentina is no slouch as a country, Rita. For a very long time, Argentina was one of, if not the preeminent economic powerhouse in all of Latin America. They fell quite a bit there due to self-inflicted socialist wounds. But under Milei, the economy really has turned around in pretty breakneck fashion. Look, there actually is something of a momentum shift when it comes to Latin America more generally. Chile, which had been governed by a horrific left-wing socialist prime minister, now they have an incoming very conservative right-wing prime minister there. You see other signs of hope as well, especially in Central America. Obviously, the El Salvador situation when it comes to Bukele is very much a bright spot there when it comes to massively decreasing crime there. So Latin America overall, I would say, with the glaring exception of Brazil, which is run by Lula da Silva, a Chinese Communist Party ally, if there ever were one, with the glaring exception of Brazil, there's a lot of very good stuff happening right now currently in Latin America. And frankly, Rita, I think a lot of this actually is downstream of Trumpian leadership. I mean, this is kind of the Monroe Doctrine, or as Trump calls it, the Don Road Doctrine. I mean, this is when Donald Trump goes in with the staggering operation in Venezuela to get Nicolas Maduro, one of the great demonstrations of American exceptionalism, frankly, in this century. I mean, it was an utterly staggering operation there to get this narco-terrorist socialist tin pot dictator there in Caracas there. So when America leads, a lot of the rest of the Western Hemisphere of the Americas follows there. And I think Javier Milei is frankly just an indicator of a lot of good that is still to come.
And he doesn't get the credit, does he, Javier Milei, for what he's achieved in such a short period of time. The economic reforms there, slashing inflation, and he's managed to slash the poverty rate in Argentina whilst also reducing welfare programs. You wouldn't think those two things would go together, but he's managed to achieve it, Josh. And all the so-called progressives who should be applauding, they call him another right-wing extremist.
Yeah, they do because they just see someone who mouths certain things they don't like, Rita, and they decide that you're a fascist. They don't really care what the results are. I mean, so much of the left here, especially in the United States, that's obviously the country that I pay close attention to, but certainly internationally as well there. They really don't particularly care about results, do they? I mean, think about here in the United States. I mean, gas prices are the lowest they've been in 5 years. And inflation is quite reasonable. The stock market is approaching all-time highs on seemingly a daily basis. The trade deficit's the lowest it's been in literally decades. I mean, I can go on and on here. It's really quite good, actually, the American economy. But nonetheless, there is a subjective sense, because the media says over and over again, oh, we have an affordability crisis. It's kind of an affordability hoax, actually. And unfortunately, there are a lot of gullible people out there who, because they don't pay attention to the actual facts and they just hate the individual who is giving a certain policy, whether it's Milei in Argentina, whether it's Trump here, whether it's any number of other conservatives all across the world there. Facts increasingly do not, frankly, change opinions. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age where feelings and emotion oftentimes carry the day, and that's happening in Argentina and to an extent here in the United States as well.
Now, the media has made much of President Trump's faux pas during his speech, where he more than once referred to Greenland as Iceland. I've got to say I've made that same mistake as well. But on a more serious note, what can you tell me about the current state of negotiations and what the Trump administration really hopes to achieve with or without its NATO partners?
So, Rita, personally, I am all in for the Greenland thing. I am like 10 out of 10 enthused at this, actually. I think this is one of Donald Trump's greatest ideas. Now, the Canada thing was classic Trumpian braggadocio. I mean, basically trying to kind of needle and twist and poke fun at our deeply socialist, tyrannical neighbors to the north. By contrast, the Greenland thing is actually very, very serious. And historically, the United States has expressed interest many, many times. A lot of folks don't realize this. America has expressed interest in Greenland, Rita, many, many times in American history. So it was actually William Seward, who was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, going all the way back to 1867, 2 years after Lincoln's assassination. Seward was the first man to actually mull the possibility of trying to acquire Greenland. Harry Truman in 1946, 1 year after the end of World War II, at the very beginning of the Cold War, he made a formal offer. He actually offered $100 million to the Danes to acquire Greenland. He saw, just as Donald Trump sees, he saw Greenland as a crucial piece of territory when it came to the then nascent Cold War, trying to deter Soviet expansionism into the Western Hemisphere. That's how Trump sees it today when it comes to both Putin's Russia and to Xi Jinping's China. So I think that Trump is actually very, very serious about potentially acquiring Greenland. Now, the latest is that he put out a Truth Social post saying that he's going to put a pause on tariffs on the European powers because the broad contours of some deal have maybe been reached. I take Trump seriously, but not literally on this one. Maybe there was a nice phone call or two there. But Donald Trump also pays very close attention to the stock market. And I think he probably was a bit spooked out when the stock market went down after the tariff announcement was made there. So I think that he's I think he's playing a little bit of 4D chess here, if I'm being very honest with you. I think that he still ardently desires Greenland. And I think there's actually a very real chance that when push comes to shove, I think that Greenland could actually become a U.S. territory by the end of Donald Trump's term. Let's not forget, by the way, that one of the last great instances of American territorial expansionism about a century ago, it's now called the U.S. Virgin Islands there in the Caribbean. Where did we get that from? We actually got it from Denmark.
Yes, you bought it, I think, for a bargain figure of around 25 million, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, there may be a negotiation happening right now with a price being discussed. I do like this little bit of cheek from some folk in Greenland. What do we call them? Greenlanders. They're mocking a certain aspect of modern American culture here. That's called the fentanyl lean, for those of you who are not familiar with that. Bringing America culture to Greenland, that video alleges. And that culture, I mean, it's funny because it's kind of true. That culture is evident in big cities, blue cities across America, where you see this very visible drug problem. What's your response, Josh, to those who say Donald Trump needs to be more focused on issues such as that? He needs to be America first and worry less about foreign policy.
I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, America first means a lot of things. It's kind of an abstract term. But America First has both foreign and domestic ramifications there. And one of the many ways that Donald Trump understands America First on the international stage, and this is laid out very clearly in the excellent national security strategy document that the White House produced about a month and a half ago, they emphasize time and time again Western hemispheric dominance. They call it the Donroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary on the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine was this early 19th century statement by James Monroe, an early president of the Republic, basically said that America has the right, if not the duty, to act when hostile foreign powers intrude in the political affairs of the Western Hemisphere. And then Teddy Roosevelt, in the first decade of the 20th century, issued what's known as the Roosevelt Corollary, basically doubling down, expanding on this Western Hemispheric priority document. So Donald Trump is basically just reiterating this. And again, the Maduro raid, Operation Absolute Resolve, I think is kind of the quintessential encapsulation of this doctrine. Greenland is very much part of the Western Hemisphere. It's basically right off the coast of Canada to an extent there. So this fits well within his conception of America first. And I think prioritizing the Western Hemisphere is America first. We're not prioritizing necessarily other far-flung regions of the world. We're prioritizing our own backyard. So look, we obviously can and should care about domestic issues, but they're already doing that. I mean, look at the way that this administration is enforcing immigration law, the way that they are enforcing law and order in places like Minneapolis there. I mean, they're very much focusing on the domestic and the foreign. So I think it's something of a false choice, Rita. Again, I'm pretty enthused about the Greenland thing. I'll be honest with you. I was actually Googling a little bit about Nuke Golf Club, the only golf course in all of Greenland there. I'm getting pretty excited about a possible golf trip there with the boys, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, there's plenty of scope for further development in Greenland. You could have all sorts of things happening there shortly. Now, before you go, we've heard from Javier Milei, and President Trump also gave a memorable speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But another man who gave a very notable speech is the Trump administration's Treasury Chief, Scott Bessent. Have a listen to this.
Governor Newsom, who strikes me as Patrick Bateman meets Sparkle Beach Ken, may be the only Californian who knows less about economics than Kamala Harris. He's here this week with his billionaire sugar daddy, Alex Soros, and Davos is a perfect place for a man who, when everyone else was on lockdown, when he was having people arrested for going to church, he was having $1,000 a night meals at the French Laundry, and I'm sure the California people won't forget that. And I can tell my message to Governor Newsom is the Trump administration is coming to California. We are going to crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Josh, he went on to point out what's happened to California under Governor Newsom, the record numbers leaving the state, the surge in poverty, homelessness, the madness during COVID, the criminally inept response to the wildfires. The list is very long, and yet Gavin Newsom right now is a front runner to be the next Democrat presidential candidate.
Yeah, Rita, I actually just flew back from California. I was actually just out in Los Angeles for a speaking event there, and I was talking with some friends over lunch and dinner about this, about whether or not Gavin Newsom actually is the 2028 frontrunner. And a lot of my friends out in California, frankly, just can't believe it because he has such an awful, pitiful track record when it comes to escalating crime, when it comes to escalating homelessness and drug overdoses. He's literally the first governor in the history of California. California became a state in the mid-19th century. He's the first governor ever since the Golden State became a state to oversee a net population egress, more people leaving than coming in. Literally for over a century and a half, California was growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and then Gavin Newsom comes in and people all of a sudden leave. So I mean, dude is just totally cancerous as a politician there. Having said that, this kind of gets back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, Rita, which is my working theory. Unfortunately, I wish it were not the case. There are a lot of people who just don't really vote on those particular grounds. They look at Gavin Newsom as Secretary Bessent says, this guy's out of central casting. He looks the part, he talks the part.
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't get it, it's because he's a white dude, right? I mean that actually could be the number one issue working against him in a 2028 Democratic primary. But based on very superficial factors there, he's very smooth. He's very glib. He's able to kind of deflect interviewers' questions back to his comfortable terrain there. He really is. I mean, despite his awful, awful, awful track record, paradoxically, he is something of a model politician. So I'll be honest with you, Rita. I think the Republicans actually tragically should probably fear him in 2028. The good news is that my California friends seem to think that Kamala Harris is going to be the favorite again in 2028 there. And boy, would I lick my chops at that possibility.
But yeah, you will hope for that. I think every Republican would be hoping for a Kamala, maybe a Kamala and Newsom ticket. That would be very interesting. Could we have two, both of them from California? You probably couldn't, could you?
It would be a constitutional challenge, but someone could possibly change residences. But we've had this conversation before. I mean, Trump almost picked Marco Rubio there. They're both Floridians there. There are ways around it, but it definitely is uncharted waters in American constitutional history.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time tonight. Joining me now, celebrity and royal commentator and the host of Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. Kinsey, we will get to the Beckham feud shortly. I am fascinated by that one. But first, Prince Harry's lawsuit against publisher of the Daily Mail and Mail has begun at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. The Duke of Sussex is one of a number of high-profile figures behind this legal action over allegations of unlawful information gathering. Kinsey, within minutes of taking to the stand, he took a dig at the royal family. What did he say?
Well, he told the High Court he was conditioned by the never complain, never explain policy and felt he had no alternative but to accept it, kind of pushing blame on the British royal family. Yet he contradicts himself somewhat later on in his testimony, acknowledging that complaining often makes matters worse. That is a lesson many would argue he has learned the hard way. He also became visibly upset, some said to the point of tears, when speaking about Meghan Markle, telling the court that media coverage had made his wife's life an absolute misery. And it's the kind of moment that gets attention, but it also invites the obvious question, what does that have to do with a case about events that predate Meghan entirely?
Exactly. And most of the negative attention Meghan Markle receives is self-inflicted. It's reaction to her programs. It's reaction to the tell-all interviews. It's reaction to the entire persona that she's trying to shove down our throats. It's so inauthentic that, of course, people are going to make some comments that she's not going to like. But let's stay with Meghan Markle. Her cooking program has reportedly been axed, with multiple sources telling Page Six it won't be returning to Netflix. Her holiday special was a ratings disaster, Kinsey. It didn't even make Netflix's top 1,000 shows. Sources are saying that Meghan will instead concentrate on building her lifestyle brand as ever.
Rita, we have been reporting for months on your program that Meghan's show was likely to be tossed in the do not resuscitate pile. So I am so proud of us. We were ahead of the curve. Next, Netflix has worked so hard to distance themselves from the show instead of promoting it. I don't see billboards for her around Los Angeles, California. I see them for Stranger Things. And there are reports that Meghan was having secret meetings to try to save the show, but Netflix doesn't believe that the return on investment is there. And the chaos during her holiday special of her father losing a limb and begging to hear from his daughter was really the final straw.
She is just such an unlikable figure, and no amount of spin and PR is going to change that. If she showed herself, maybe we would like her, but she is just so hopelessly inauthentic. Now let's get to the Beckhams. It's been a chaotic week for the Beckham family. We saw earlier this week that extraordinary statement from eldest son Brooklyn, lashing out at his parents, particularly his mother Victoria, also known as Posh Spice. Kinsey, David and Victoria Beckham would be gutted naturally, but sources are saying they are blaming Nicola, their son's wife, not him, and they're only going to speak to him if he splits from her. What more can you tell me about what's happening in that family?
Well, they have tried to communicate with him without her presence for years at this point. They find Nicola to be a pretty terrible influence, and they just want one-on-one time with their son. I think they would communicate with him while he was still married to her. I really do. But they are desperate for privacy and to set the record straight without Nicola, who seems to be a troublemaker and an instigator.
Look, I've tried to not pass judgment on this because you never know what's happening behind closed doors. You don't know if you're being manipulated by clever spin doctors who are painting a particular picture. So I've tried to have some sympathy for Brooklyn, but I've got to say the comments he made about his mother are just terrible. They are just so low, very Harry and Meghan like, the airing of the dirty laundry and some of those accusations that are just going to not be forgotten. Are we ever going to see that wedding video, that infamous dance at the wedding that formed part of his complaint that his mother was inappropriate dancing on him? Are we ever going to see the video and be able to make up our own minds about what happened that night?
You know, Victoria's a dancing queen. We saw her dance in the Spice Girls. She was one of the worst dancers. So I have a really hard time believing that she pulled out all the stops for Brooklyn's wedding. But two things can be true. Brooklyn can expect more emotionally from his parents, and the way he's expressing that publicly can be toxic. And according to page 6, Brooklyn and Nicola had allegedly reached a point of frustration with reading things that weren't true. Get a job and you'll have much less time to Google yourself. This is a kid who hasn't worked a day in his life.
Oh, no. He did have that photography book, which I'm sure he got that deal just because his photography is top notch. I thought Victoria was the best of the Spice Girls when it came to dancing. I thought she was selected mainly for her dancing, not her singing, but we may have to save this debate for another day about who was the worst dancer amongst the Spice Girls. Let's talk about the new development in the battle between It Ends With Us co-stars Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Blake Lively's text messages with Taylor Swift, an email to Ben Affleck, and statements from Jenny Slate and Isabella Ferreira's depositions about Justin Baldoni have all been unveiled. What have we learned, Kinsey?
A lot. And it's not a positive reflection on anyone, especially Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift calls Justin Baldoni the B word in these text messages between her and Blake Lively. And one of the reasons why people care about this is A, Taylor was like, I had nothing to do with this. I'm not involved publicly. And B, remember when she talked about just desperate for sympathy, public sympathy, and talked about how when Kanye called her the B word, how traumatizing that was for her. And then she goes and does the same thing to Justin Baldoni. But, you know, Blake and Ryan sliding into the inboxes of A-listers en masse with derogatory portrayals of Justin arguably caused greater reputational harm than Baldoni's team allegedly amplifying a TikToker or two. I think we all walk away hating all of these people, and I think they're going to regret this case at the end of the day.
No one comes out of this looking particularly good, do they? Now, Katy Perry has joined former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I played some footage of that earlier. But during his speech, Trudeau referenced a recent date with an American girl at a rooftop bar in Montreal. He said when she ordered a Jack and Coke, the server kindly informed her that there was no more American alcohol, not just in that bar, but anywhere in Montreal and probably anywhere across the entire country. That's an example of Canadians standing up for each other. That's an example of soft power, being motivated to be there for each other at a time of stress, at a time of anxiety. Oh, gosh. Kinsey, these two deserve each other.
I think it's an example of how cheap Canada is. But, you know, I would need a Jack and Coke, too, if I were to let that guy cop a feel. I think he's the biggest creep. But why? But why are we platforming losers who quit their jobs is my real question. It's the second coming of Prince Harry, Justin Trudeau, coming to a Toronto Hilton real estate convention near you. I don't care what he has to say. Neither do Canadian truck drivers. This man has no backbone.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, all this talk about Canadian unity and soft power. Well, where was that when he was seizing bank accounts and targeting Canadian truckers who were just wanting to work? So, yeah, when it counted, he was an absolute tyrant. And talking about tyrants during COVID, Gavin Newsom has been humiliated at the Economic Forum after he was denied entry into the US clubhouse. It came after Newsom rushed out of Donald Trump's keynote speech to tell reporters that it was remarkably insignificant. White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly told the New York Post no one in Davos knows who third-rate Governor Newsom is or why he is frolicking around Switzerland instead of fixing the many problems he created in California. Ouch, Kinsey, that's a pretty harsh assessment there.
Pretty accurate assessment. Gavin Newsom isn't governing, he's auditioning. While we struggle with homelessness, drugs, and rising crime, he's globetrotting and posturing for a 2028 presidential run. The desperation to be seen has become embarrassing. I'm feeling the secondhand embarrassment while I'm looking at the man on the screen. And the neglect back home is the real scandal.
And when it comes to the film and TV industry, he's failing even there. California has suffered a massive drop, 20% fewer movies and TV projects last year. And this is even after Newsom rolled out record tax incentives to try to keep Hollywood at home, Kinsey.
California didn't lose film and television by accident. This is an industry the state was branded on and has been for, ever. And it's declining on Newsom's watch despite those massive incentives. That's not bad luck. That's failed leadership, and it should disqualify him from higher office.
It should, but as we discussed earlier on the program with Josh Hammer, he's a front runner. He may be the front runner, and his only real competition at the moment seems to be Kamala Harris. So that is good news for the Republicans, I've got to say, Kinsey. If the next Democratic presidential candidate is Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris, the Republicans are going to be looking forward to that race.
The ghost of Joe Biden is more appealing to me than Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, or I was afraid you were going to say AOC, and then I was going to verbally vomit. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Gavin Newsom would be such a blessing to the GOP.
Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time tonight.